Cardano has an opportunity to revolutionize online media in kind of an unexpected way. Get ready. Let's go. The way in which Cardano might be able to revolutionize online media is an idea. It's a concept, just like the stake pool index fund concept was an idea, and we're going to cover it. But first, we've got to make sure we cover the current events. I love what we're about to cover. This is the kind of stuff that happens in the shadows when the spotlight is elsewhere that really builds an ecosystem when no one's looking. So this is the kind of stuff that you do that doesn't garner a lot of attention. You don't really get credit for it. But if you're a crazy billionaire who thinks out 5-10 years, not 5 or 10 months, this is the stuff you do, knowing that in 5 or 10 years, this is what builds all the momentum. This is what creates this unstoppable machine. We've got a crazy billionaire. His name is Charles, and he's thinking 5 or 10 years ahead. So here we have Caitlin Long, who's done a tremendous amount for the entire crypto space in the state of Wyoming, especially. She's tweeting, "Great news for University of Wyoming, which announced at the Wyoming Blockchain Select Committee hearing that Dr. Lisa Yin, a world-renowned cryptographer and wonderful former colleague of mine, is joining. Thanks, Charles, for helping make this possible." The implication of Charles' tweet there is that Charles probably made sure the University of Wyoming had enough dough to get this famous cryptographer to come to the University of Wyoming. But this is only relevant if we understand who this person is. So you're probably aware that Bitcoin runs on SHA-256, right? That wasn't something that Satoshi invented. This is secure hashing algorithm 256 that was created by the NSA. They weren't trying to help Satoshi create Bitcoin when they made that. They're concerned with ciphers and secret codes, right? They're trying to keep secrets and that kind of stuff. So the secure hash algorithm family of hashing algorithms started with SHA-0 and SHA-1. So this cryptographer who Charles is helping to bring to the University of Wyoming, she was part of the team that first broke SHA-1. They were the ones that broke SHA-1. So we've covered how hashing algorithms work on this channel previously. Feel free to go back if you want more detail on that. But basically, her team found two different inputs into the hashing algorithm that created a collision in the digest, right? The output. So if you put one value into a secure hash algorithm, you get an output on the other side. And there shouldn't be two inputs that produce the same output. When that happens, it's called a collision. Her team were the first ones that were able to show input pairs that created a collision on the other side of SHA-1. They basically broke SHA-1. This is kind of crazy because her team broke SHA-1 in 2005. And you can see right here, Microsoft didn't stop using SHA-1 for Windows until August of last year. So she's 15 years ahead of the curve here. Obviously good for the University of Wyoming and their academics there. But this is also good for Cardano because Cardano funded the blockchain lab at the University of Wyoming, and having such a world-class cryptographer there will only accrue benefit to this blockchain lab that obviously has extremely close ties to Cardano. I'm not saying Cardano should or is in any way planning on doing this, but if you were going to point out the weaknesses in a cryptographic project like another blockchain, who better to have on your side than the person who broke SHA-1? This really interesting article by Cardanians.io details something that sci-fi has already shown us. You know, in the old days, before Netflix existed and Hollywood studios could make big budget sci-fi movies. I mean, they kind of still do, but let's face it, movies are different now. But back when they could make these big budget sci-fi movies, they would have these characters running around. You know, in my head, for some reason, the one that I keep going to, the mental picture I'm like creating is Minority Report with Tom Cruise and Colin Farrell. But when Tom Cruise is running around in that movie trying to buy stuff, it's like in those types of movies, you never saw them like break out their wallet and use something out of their wallet. It's always like their watch, right? Or like some kind of chip embedded in their skin or something. And they just kind of like scan it and pay for stuff. And they're always like, that'll be 300 credits, and they're like, okay, fine, 300 credits. And they just like scan it and that's how they pay. So Cardano, IOHK rather, according to this article, donated $500,000 in ADA to the University of Wyoming. That $500,000 in ADA, I'm guessing, has appreciated by now. Who knows if the University of Wyoming kept it in ADA and experienced that appreciation, or if they were being, fiscally conservative and they turned it into dollars immediately. And one of the things they're working on, so they have the blockchain lab, which we've talked about there. One of the things they're also working on is a piece of hardware, a chip that could be used to store and transfer data, right? Or other cryptocurrencies. So this is pretty much exactly what those sci-fi movies were predicting. This is a case of life imitating art as opposed to art imitating life, right? We've seen this so many times. This is a chip that they said is going to have RFID and some other sort of short range communication abilities. And it could go into something like a watch, and you could use it to send crypto to somebody else with a similar chip in their watch. There we go, sci-fi. Cardano has an unbelievable opportunity to do something awesome in online media. They can stop everyone from selling us supplements. Here's what I mean by that. So Charles going on the Lex Fridman podcast is what made me think about this, right? I thought back to Lex Fridman's initial appearance on Rogan's podcast. Why did Lex go on Rogan's podcast? Rogan wanted Lex because Lex had some interesting stuff in his brain as an AI researcher from MIT. He had some interesting stuff in his brain, and Rogan's like, hey, if I get this guy on my podcast, it'll create some great content. And then I'm going to push that content out and use it to sell on-it supplements to everybody. Lex Fridman, right? He famously went on the Rogan podcast wearing his black suit, white shirt, black tie. Rogan challenged him on why he would dress that way. And Lex said, hey, this is one of the biggest things I'll ever do in my life. And when my grandchildren watch this, I want to be dressed well. And he had a good point, because the reason he was on that podcast was because Rogan's circulation made it the biggest exposure Lex would ever get in his entire life, probably, right? The biggest break up to that point, the biggest break he would ever get, right? Research, even being a researcher in AI at MIT, would never give him anything close to the exposure he got on that one episode of the Rogan podcast. So then Lex goes back, and he's now got a little bit of a brand name. Everybody knows Lex Fridman. This guy has interesting stuff in his brain about AI and a lot of other technical cool stuff. There's a little bit of a Lex brand name now. So he goes back and he builds his own podcast where he can now sell us supplements, right? And this has happened over and over again. Even outside the world of, technical things. Jocko Willink, he went on the Rogan podcast, where he got the biggest exposure he would ever have in his whole life. And then he went back and created his own podcast so that he could sell us, Jocko energy drinks that are now in Wawa gas stations across the Southeast. You know what I mean? It's like we're all just trying to consume what they have in their brains, and they are forced to sell us supplements. Every last one of them, I swear, they're all trying to sell us supplements, and we're just trying to consume what's in their brains. It's like highly inefficient, but the system is set up. That's the most efficient way to do it. For them to sell us some inane product in exchange for what they have in their brains, it doesn't have to be this way, right? And I'm not talking about the use case for crypto that we all know about, where we disintermediate all these online media platforms and the advertisers just pay the content creators directly, and the consumers, or maybe the consumers, pay the content creator directly in microtransactions that can't happen in the legacy systems because they're too small. We all know about that use case. Every blockchain talks about that. I'm talking about this other interaction, the one between Lex and Rogan, between Jocko and Rogan. Here's the problem. We only get to experience this information in the brains of the Lexes and Jockos of the world if they know that the exposure on Rogan can be monetized by them. It can only be monetized by them if they sort of embody these two very different skill sets. The one skill set is, and I'm calling, even though these aren't really skills, but we'll call them skill sets. So the one skill set is having stuff in their brain that we want to consume. There's demand for the stuff in their brain. And this completely other skill set is knowing how to take that exposure they get from Rogan, bring that back to their own podcast, and then figure out how to sell as supplements, right? It's like, I don't want to just hear from the people who embody both of those skill sets. I just want the thinking part, right? If I don't need them to have this skill set where they can monetize the exposure by figuring out how to sell me supplements. I just want them to have the thinking part because that's the only part I really want to consume. I'm not shopping for supplements or kettlebells or mace bells or any of that kind of stuff, right? So the problem this creates is that there are people out there who have a great amount of information in their brains and all this incredible thinking, and they can't go around and go on all the podcasts and let the whole world enjoy all this incredible thinking they have in their brains because they've got to go to work every day, right? I mean, they may be able to do a podcast here or there on the weekend, but it's only worth it for them to give us like what Lex has given us, all this information in his brain, all this like power to analyze things, all this really interesting stuff that I want to consume. He's only able to give that to me because he also has this ability to figure out how to monetize it, right? But I don't want to miss out on all the great thinkers out there that don't also contain this monetization skill set, right? Cardano can end this supplement selling madness, this chain of building supplement selling empires that's required for us to be able to consume the thinking of these people. So Cardano is going to be a big blockchain project with smart contracts that actually work, unlike the broken Ethereum. If you're listening to this channel, you already know that. So we're going to have smart contracts that actually work. So every podcast, like Rogan's, like Lex's, like Jocko's, all of them could just have smart contracts, and every time they have an episode, the ad revenue from that podcast could go into the smart contract and they could just negotiate a cut for their guests, right? Instead of their guests having to go out there and become supplement selling guys, their guests could just take a cut, 5%, 10%, 50%, 90%, whatever it is. They can have a cut of the ad revenue from that podcast, and we can have like Oracle solutions that inform the smart contract of how many views that episode of the podcast got and use that to calculate the ad revenue so we can figure out the cut, of the guest, even before the money rolls in there from the advertising platform or whatever it is. There's a million different ways we could do this with Cardano because the smart contracts actually work. And in this way, we can get the innovative or interesting thinking out of people's brains and not just the people who have the innovative thinking and also know how to sell supplements, which is ridiculous. We can end the madness, guys. We can end the madness of supplement selling. Nobody has to try to sell me kettlebells or supplements or any of this crazy stuff anymore. Cardano can do this. Talk to you tomorrow.